All right, what's up, geometry folks? Today we're going to be learning about the midpoint formula. Now this might look a little different than the one we saw before. This one's going to work a lot easier for you, and just recognize that you're going to be finding the midpoint. We're labeling it MX and MY. So let's see how this thing works. Here in our first problem, we have these endpoints of C, -2, -4, and D, 6, 2. And we want to find the coordinates of our midpoint. Now, Siegel and I laid this out nicely for you. Step 1 is to identify your X's and Y's, your X1, your Y1, your X2, and your Y2. So let's label that first. We have X1 right here and Y1. Those are our first points. And then we have X2 and Y2. Now, once you do that, it's easy to transfer it over here. So X1, -2, X2 is 6, Y1, -4, and Y2 is 2. See, all I did was I just took that information over here. So that's step 1. Now, once you've labeled everything, step 2 is just to plug it into your midpoint formula. So here, we have X1 right here plus X2. Well, go back up here. X1 is -2. X2 is 6. Same thing for the Y's. We have Y1 and Y2. We'll take them from above. Y1, -4. Y2 is 2. And so now the last step is just to solve. And for these, this one's pretty simple, but for other ones, you can use your calculator. So here, we'll have 4/2. This is MX equals that. MY is going to equal -2/2. So our final answer for number 1 is going to be 2, -1. Pretty simple problem. Let's look at another one. And so this next problem says, what are the coordinates of the center of the circle if our endpoints are 8, -4, and -3, 2? Well, it might sound complicated, but really if we draw our circle, and like B is here, A is there, and here's our diameter, they're asking you to find the coordinates for the center. Well, you know what? That sounds a lot like, to me, it's a midpoint question. So we do the same exact process. X1, X2, Y1, Y2. Here I'm going to do the same thing. I'll do X1, Y1, X2, Y2. I'm going to transfer that information over. So X1 is 8, X2 is -3, Y1 is -4, Y2 is 2. And just like with the problem before, we plug everything in down here. So remember, for the MX, it's X1 plus X2. We take that from step 1, we have 8 plus -3. For the MY, we have Y1 plus Y2. And as you know, those are from up above as well. So we get -4 and 2. And then you put it in your calculator, and you're gonna get fractions. You're gonna get 5/2 for the X, and then you're gonna get -1 for the Y. Is that okay? And the answer is, of course that's okay. You can get fractions. Don't freak out. And when you put 5/2 in your calculator, you'll get 2.5. So if we go back to the multiple choice question, we're looking for 2.5, -1. Well, guess what? That's number 2. So the whole point there is, don't get thrown off by fractions. You're going to be just fine. All right, so here's problem 3. And it looks a little different, and we're going to use a similar process. It says point M is the midpoint of AB. If we were to draw a picture, we'd have like A here, we'd have B here, and we have like M in the middle, right? It says A is -3, 6, and it says M is -5, 2. So they gave us the midpoint on this one, and they're asking us, what are the coordinates of B? So this can be kind of tricky, but we're not going to get tripped up on it. We're going to label things the same way. So we know that this one's X1, this one's Y1, and we know that we're missing our X2 and our Y2, right? We don't know what those are. So for X2 and Y2, we're just going to leave those as X and Y when we plug them in up top, because we don't know them. And then for X1, we'll plug in -3, and for Y1, we'll plug in 6. So now we're going to take this information and we're going to slide it into step 2. And I'm making some room because this is where the trick is going to happen. So make sure you're paying attention to this. So you know this is our formula, right? Now we know that mx is the x coordinate of our midpoint, right? And we know that my is the y coordinate of our midpoint. So what are we going to plug in for mx? You got it, -5. We put it on the outside over here. Now what about for my? You got it, the y coordinate of the midpoint. So we're going to label 2 here. So now where are we going to go from here? Well, let's see. We know what x1 is, -3. And we don't know what x2 is. We'll leave that as x. And we know what y1 is, that's 6. But we don't know what y2 is, that's y. But lucky for us, we're so good at algebra that we know how to get rid of those denominators. Same thing as we've been doing. Multiply both sides by 2, right? Do that with both of these. Multiply both sides by 2. So when you do that, you clear all that up, you're going to get, I'll write it over here, get a little hair in there. -10 equals -3 plus x. For that one, and this one right over here, you're going to have 4 equals 6 plus y. So now we just get the x by itself. We get x equals -7. That's our b, right, for b, so that's -7. And then over here we subtract by 6, we get y equals -2. So our final answer is -7, -2. And if we wanted to, we could check our answer. But the key point here is to understand that sometimes they're going to give you the midpoint. Then in that case, you're going to plug in for that mx and my. I think there's one more on here. Let's see if we can handle it. Ah, here we go. It looks crazy, but trust me, it's not. You're all ready for this. You're taking the steps. Let's destroy this problem. So here we go. Diagram of a circle. They're going to throw this at you. QR is our diameter. So here's the diameter right there. They gave us 1 point and they gave us C, which in this case is our midpoint. So it's going to be very similar to the problem before, only now it's just a picture to try to throw you off. So we'll do the same thing we did before. Now we know, we can actually label these center points. We know that 3.5 and 2, that's going to be our mx and our my, right? So those are our midpoints. And we know that this can be, the Q can be our x1 and our y1. So let's transfer this information over to our step 1. So x1 we know is 1, y1 we know is 8. We don't know these endpoints. These are our x2 and y2, right? So for x2 it's x, and for y2 it's just y. Now let's move on to step 2. Let's plug in everything we know. So we know that mx is 3.5. So let's plug that in right there. And we know that my is 2. We know that x1 is 1. We know that y1 is 8. And then we don't know x2 or y2. And guess what? This looks exactly the same as it did in problem 3. You're going to multiply both sides by 2. So I'll write this in green. Some holiday colors. Multiply both sides by 2. And what you're going to get is, I'll write this over here, 3.5 times 2 is going to give you 7. And that's going to equal 1 plus x. Which we know then that x equals, what is that? Carry the 7 divided by 45. I think it's 6. So x is 6. That's our x coordinate. And what about the y? Well, when we do the 2 times 2 on both sides, we'll get 4 equals 8 plus y. And when we subtract by 8, you'll get y equals -4. So our final answer is 6, -4 for the coordinates of R. And remember, if you're unsure, you can always go back and check your answers. But this is the right one, and best of luck on midpoint. I know you're going to do a great job. And remember, Mr. Siegel's voice is not the only voice you're going to hear.